Okay, so let's get back once again. Yeah, let's finish it and have some fun. So now I think that yeah, once again, I think this table is like one of the probably the most important table in the entire chapter. If you understand what really is going on, you should have a very good feeling about the entire chapter. Everything is just basically some kind of derivations, alternations from what we're doing over here. The delta of the options are 2. So we short 100,000, just 52,200 shares of the underlying stocks. What is the cost? The cost is over here. Price of the stocks multiplied by how many shares we purchased. Don't worry too much about that. So just take a look at it, and we know what it means. That would be fine. So what happens from week 0 to week 1? After we set up these positions, the short 100,000 shares of the European core and long 52,200 shares of the underlying assets. After 1 week, what happens is that instead of a price increase, the price of the underlying assets decrease from $49 to $48.12. What also changes is the delta of your European call options short positions. We still short 100,000 shares, but now a few things change. The first thing is that the stock price decreased from $49 per share to $48.12 per share. The second thing is that the time to maturity also there was 20 0, but then on week 1, we only have 19 weeks remaining. So that's the reason why the value of the delta also changes. And as you can see, when we have a decrease, it's actually a decrease in the value of the delta of the European call options. What does it mean? What is this 0.45? It means that to stay at a delta neutral position, to stay at a position where all the price change of our 100,000, the value change of our 100,000 shares of the short European calls, if we want to make it we want to let it be offset by our current underlying holdings of the underlying assets, we actually need to hold fewer stock. Option decreases. Now we don't need to hold that much of the underlying assets anymore. So it turns out that we actually only need to hold 45,800 shares. Basically, we have to sell 6,400 shares of the underlying assets because previously we hold 52,200 shares. Now we only need 45,800 shares. So we sell 6,400 shares of the underlying assets that we currently on week 1 to remain a delta neutral positions. Previously, price of this much. Now we want to sell this much of the shares, this many of the shares at this price. Basically, multiply the 2, you got what you got. This is the price that you gain from selling. This is the dollar value that you gain from selling 6,400 shares of the underlying stock. Okay, so that's what happens on week 1. On week 2, the price we sell some more shares, and then because the delta also decreases. Much of a holding. Week 3, we want to have 59,600 shares of the underlying assets. So we buy some more back once again. Blah, 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 blah. In the first, so we actually have 2 scenarios. In the first scenario, you can see that stock price. The stock price seems to stay at a level above the strike price, right? What does that mean? It means that there's more, the chances are more likely that the side which short the European call options towards will most likely exercise his or her rights to buy the 100,000 shares at the price of $50 per share from us. What happens? Still just do our own delta hedging. On week 19, it doesn't deviate that much from strike price. The time to maturity is almost close to zero. That's the reason why the delta gradually. So here, when it has a value of 1, what does it mean? A movement in the underlying assets and also on the European call options. At this price, with this value of the delta, when there's a $1 increase in to offset exactly the price change of 100,000 shares, we need to hold exactly 100,000 shares, 100,000 shares of the underlying assets. What is this column? This column is basically our purchase. This column is the cumulative costs. So previously, much on week 0, that is the number over here. And then on week 1, we sell some shares for the price of $308,000, and we have a decrease in the cost is always the current value. So this is the current value from time to time. What happens on week 19 is that now the total cost is about and then at the end, from week 19 to week 20, what happens is that the cost has accumulated to a value of, remember, these are all $1,000, so this is $5,263,000 and $300. What happens on week 20 is that our counterparty will exercise his right to buy 100,000 shares of the underlying assets of the price of $50 per share. $50 multiplied by $100,000, that is exactly $5 million. So at the end, when they purchase the stock from us, we're going to experience a $5 million cash inflows. So at the end, this $5,263,000 that is subtracted by $5 million. At the end, the cost of the entire hedging process is about $263,300. That is a value above, but quite close to our original value of our Black-Scholes Mertens price of this European call options. So at the beginning of this slide, what did we do? We did the calculation to see what is the price, what is the hypothetical value or the fair value of this European call option. It should be $2.4 per share, and then for 100,000 shares, it should be $240,000. That was the cost, and what do? We sell it at a premium for $300,000. So the financial institution actually sell it at a price higher than the fair value. That's the reason why we would say that the financial institution $60,000 profits. And according to what we do, if we're doing the delta hedging, it turns out that in scenario 1, the entire cost is about $263,300. So we previously sold the call option at a price of $300,000. Along the entire process of delta hedging, we accumulated an amount of $263,000. At the end, we actually obtained a gain of the price difference between the three. But that's in the first scenario where we make an hypothesis that the price change the price goes to a level that will be that the option will be exercised. So I'm pretty sure you guys have some so far, but we'll come back to the question after we walk you guys through the second example. Okay. After the second example, I think you'll have a quite good understanding of about what is exactly happening behind all the tricks. So now let's make another hypothesis. Let's assume for a different price route, a different price path. So again, we begin in week 0 where the stock price was $49. The delta value is 0.522. At week 0, we purchased 52,200 shares. Yeah, I didn't really mention about this column, but we also consider about the interest cost of the money that we spent. So instead of focusing, let's consider a situation where the European call will not be exercised, or namely, the price of the underlying assets is below the exercise price, the strike price. So it goes from 49 to 49.75, blah, 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 blah. Assume that we see that the price decrease to a level lower than $50 and it stays till the end of week 20. The time to maturity decreased to a level very remains at a level below the strike price, the chances that it will be exercised goes down and down and down to almost 0. That's hold such a large position in the underlying assets. That's the reason why the cumulative cost is actually very close to slightly above the value of $240,000. It's at the end, it turns out that the European option will not be exercised, and through the entire delta hedging process, we accumulate an amount that equals to $156,000 and $600. Okay, it's also the value that's close to, but above the value of $240,000, right? So you can see that when we are doing the delta hedging, in both scenarios, we actually have to sacrifice some kind of costs, and these costs are actually close to, but above the value of the original European cost price. Originally, the price was about $240,000 because why would we sell it? Why could we sell it for a higher price? That's usually because we are the market standing at this kind of scenarios. We are usually the market makers, so we usually make some kind of profits from the spread. When the price is $2.4, we usually sell it for slightly above $2.4. If we sell it for a price higher than $2.4, it's standing at the position of a market maker, we should buy it slightly lower than $2.4. Here we are making a very crazy scenario that we are selling it for $3 per share. But never mind. Later on, you can see that through the process of delta hedging, in either scenarios, whether the stock at the end whether the option at the end will be exercised or not, in both scenarios, we accumulated some kind of costs that is close to, but above the original value of the entire European co-options, right? So what is exactly happening behind all tricks? So first, why wasn't the cost exactly equal to the value of $240,000? Does anyone has any kind of guesses? Suppose that we're doing a perfect delta hedging. Every instant second, every minute, every second, every milliseconds, we're rebalancing our portfolio. We're always remain delta neutral. If that was the case, then you can see that it turns out that we should, at the end, have a cost that is exactly equal to $240,000, right? Because that is the point of delta hedging. Delta hedging makes us we could get all the price changes of the underlying assets. That was the point, and that was the case if we could conduct a perfect delta hedging. Why at the end it turns out that we have a cost that's slightly above $240,000? Cost, and it's actually the correct answer. To be more precise, what we are not doing is the difference between this approach and a hypothetically perfect delta hedging is that we only rebalance our portfolio once a week, right? We could not possible for people to do delta hedging at any instant minutes. There may not be enough liquidity for people to do so, and it's also very costly in terms of your all kind of possible instant changes of the market conditions. So it's just not perfect. It's just not feasible for people to do, even with algo trade. People only focus on this is also like the norm on the practitioner's world. Like people usually rebalance their portfolio once a week or even like once a month. And if that was the case, you can see that from week 1 to week 2, from week 2 to week 3, from time to time, some kind of frictions we lost according to our rebalancing process. Let me just like provide another reason why it's impossible for people to do delta hedging like at any instant minutes or even like at daily frequencies. So remember, what are we doing? We're only doing at the beginning of week 0, we sell 400,000 shares of this European call option. And in reality, it turns out that people do, especially market makers, financial institutions that act as market makers, they do all kinds of option tradings. And every day, I think maybe like thousands or like tens of thousands of trades of option tradings within a day. So it's just not possible for people to do like at higher frequencies. So that is the case, and you can see that by the change of the delta, the change of the underlying assets price. Another reason why we cannot perfectly remain at a position that will have the exact cost that equals to the price of the European call option is because, take a look at this graph once again. Delta hedge only works when the price change is small. Which takes care of this curvature on the value function of, say, like this derivatives value function. For delta hedge to work perfectly, it has to be the case that you change your delta whenever you deviate the price of, say, if you deviate from point A to this, instantly change our delta positions according to the they just positive. So it change at any instant second. So that's the two reasons why it's impossible for people to do a perfect delta hedge. But still, it works almost perfectly. You can at the beginning, we sell the entire 100,000 shares of the European call options of a price of $3 per share. So that's $300,000 together. And at the end, in both scenarios, we're going to enjoy a profits that's roughly about $40,000. We don't have to be afraid of any kind of like price deviations of the underlying assets. The price could go up to be or beyond the exercise price. The price could go below the exercise price. We are not afraid of either scenarios because in either scenarios, you can actually estimate a value of the delta at that specific point, and you will be able to rebalance your portfolio accordingly. That's the point of delta hedging, and I think this should be quite intuitive for you to understand. So previously we skipped one slide, which is the figure of it along the time to maturity. You can see that the time to maturity of a delta some levels when the time to maturity. So you have to like a lot of time remaining, but then on the left hand side it is the time that very close to the exercise period, where it's very close to the maturity. You can see that in the previous two demonstrations, when we're in a scenario where it's most likely that the option will be exercised, the delta gets very close to 1. Then, when we are very close to maturity, but the price of the underlying assets remain lower than the exercise price, the delta value gradually shrinks and get to the level of 0, because the value of this option almost becomes priceless. It becomes, there's no value of the option at all. So you can see that for in the money, for out of the money options there, this is when we have a time to maturity very close to where the options are almost going to expire, you can see that it converge to 1. You will only remain a value that's close to like 0.5 when we are looking at the money options. So that was the case, the variation of delta along the time to maturity. Okay. Any questions so far? Okay. So yeah, you guys, congratulations. You guys have like conquered the most important concept. I think like this is the most important concept, because any other Greek letters are basically just like variations to the idea of delta. You can see that what are we doing for delta? We're securing our positions in accordance to the value change of the underlying assets. Obviously, you could also try to do hedging according to a lot of different parameters. For data, basically, we're discussing about the price change of the derivative or the portfolio of the derivative in accordance with respect to the passage of time. So now we're focusing on time. That is the idea about theta. Because theta of a call or a put option is usually negative, because when there's a passage of time, usually there's only decreasing value of the call options or the put options, because most of the value of call and put comes from its time value, and which means that when there's less time remaining, usually they will have a shrink in the values. That is theta. You can take a look at these are properties about theta. I don't think we have to discuss too much about theta. What about gamma? For gamma is an idea very closely related to delta. It's just that previously we capture the price change of the derivative with respect to the underlying assets only at the first moment. We only take the first order derivative of the derivative on the price change of the underlying assets. For gamma, basically, we focus on the second order. Why do we have to focus on the second order? It's because the value function of any kind of derivatives are usually nonlinear, like along the stock price. Because when it actually increase at a speed higher than the slope of the pre. So basically, the value of gamma help us capture that curvatures. Why do we need to care about this? Usually, the deviation, the derivatives will be larger than what delta could capture. So gamma is like a security that helps us to further capture that the larger price changes in the underlying assets. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. Yeah, I think we don't have to spend too much time on it. For a delta neutral, so people also consider about like delta neutral. People also consider about what is the when we think about higher moments like gamma, we actually have to first fix the delta value of the underlying assets. Otherwise, you will have no way to capture the relationship. If delta and also gamma are changing at the same time, it's really hard for us to think about what is the effect of gamma on the underlying assets. So assume that we are looking at a delta neutral portfolio. Multiplied by delta t plus 1/2 gamma delta. This delta over here only represents change in price. So we are using the same notations, but because we're looking at a delta neutral portfolio, so there's no. Suppose we first create a delta neutral portfolio. So now our portfolio is already delta neutral. It doesn't have any kind of price change of small price change of there is basically a total derivative. So what is so change of the portfolio equals to the partial change of the portfolio to the partial change of S, the underlying assets multiplied by delta S. Second order. First derive on the scale of changing stock price, because now we are focusing on the change of time. So you can also tap. Basically what we're doing over here. And now let's take a look. If we're focusing on a delta neutral portfolio, it basically means that we already tried our best to remain that the value of delta. So what is the value of delta? This one is delta. What is this thing? This thing is the gamma thing that we are looking at. What is this thing? The thing is beta that we have previously mentioned already. So assume that we are dealing with a portfolio that is already delta neutral. We can very safely say that delta is 0. So we can just cross out this term, and basically we're left with this change portfolio equals to theta, the value of theta that you estimated, multiplied by the change of time, plus 1/2 gamma. Gamma is what we are depicting over here, multiplied by the change in stock price to the second power. So what does this plot mean? It means that so for A and B, we're taking yeah. So the first and the second, for the first and the second graph, we're talking about a scenario. So first, remember that previously I mentioned theta is usually negative. Previously mentioned that theta in most kind of cases are usually negative. So you can see that we usually, when we think about the scenario where the price change is almost 0, we begin. Why was that the case? You can think about when you hold any kind of European call option or any kind of European put options, when you hold it, and suppose we first conduct a delta neutral. When the time deviates, when the time passes, like when we have another additional week passage, and when if it's the case that price doesn't really change, then we only have a decrease in the value in our call option and our put option. Will have a slightly decrease in its value. But suppose that there's a higher change, there's a larger change. And remember that we are already dealing any kind of curvature, any kind of large price changes. If that was the case, you can see that we have a price increase when we have any kind of price changes, no matter positive or no matter it's going negative. A and B, we basically look at situations areas where we have a negative gamma. So in my previous example, I was talking about holding a naked single call option or a single put options, right? Why would anyone have a negative gamma? It's basically because one could also stand at a position where, like we previously said, we could take a short position in a call option, and also we could take a short position in. Altogether, we could have a collection of derivatives, and collectively, our derivative could have a negative gamma, or it could have a positive gamma. So that is the idea. Later on, that's also another reason why now I'm using pi. Pi, like previously, I think in chapter 15, I also used this notation. It denotes the value of a portfolio of options. The change of the value of the options can be expressed this way if we remain a delta neutral portfolio. Okay? Don't worry too much about it. Basically means that we first do delta hedging already. Now, what is the reaction of the change in portfolio's price, portfolio's value, according to the value of gamma? With larger gamma, we basically, if you are standing at a positive position, if you are standing at a positive gamma, with larger gamma, we're going to have a higher increase in the in our, and vice versa. Okay, does that make sense? You guys have, yes? That's right. So, like I said, what is let me erase this part. What is gamma? Gamma is expressed as, so she was asking, like, what is the relationship between gamma and also delta? So gamma is expressed as the second derivative of the underlying asset, the underlying options, or the value of a portfolio's change in second order with respect to the price. So you can also consider it as if we're taking a derivative of a pi over s. A delta of our portfolio over s. You can also understand that way as well. What does it mean? It means that, so like we see in the previous plots, delta also change from time to time to the stock price. So basically, you can also understand gamma as the curve, the slope cut at each point. So that's another way to understand gamma. Or if you want to understand gamma by itself, it basically means it can capture the larger price change in the underlying portfolio, a portfolio of the options, with respect to a larger change in the stock price. Okay, so because it captures the curvature, so anything that's too much change with respect by the second moment, which is the gamma. Okay, so gamma and delta are probably two of the most important parameters you have to understand in the Greek letters. I very quickly go through theta because people really don't talk about theta that much. Theta, this basically, it tells us that along the time value decreases. So usually it's negative. It may decrease in it decreases in a linear way. So probably you have to be aware of it, but don't worry too much about that. Yeah, sure. That's the total differentiation. So she asked you about where the total differentiation comes from. So basically, so assume we have a function of g. G is a function of a, b. Want to take a total differentiation. Basically, g, the change in g can be expressed as g partial a multiplied by the change in a plus partial g partial b multiplied change in c partial g change in b. That's for the first moment. If you want also the higher moments, you can also have 2 square g partial a squared partial a change in a squared blah 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 blah. That's basically total derivative. So here what I'm doing is I'm making a total of the value of our portfolio of into price, underlines price, and also to T. I could also expand it according to the other Greek letters later on. But for now, I'm only expanding in these. And it is mentioned that if we could first construct a delta neutral, there also we can cancel out this part. We are left with the rest of the two things. That is what the slides show. Okay. So gamma of a co-option. So gamma is the same for other things equal. Suppose that we're talking about co-option and the put option with the same time to maturity, with the same strike price, and under the same, and for the same underlying assets, the gamma should be the same. That's also what I was referring to when I say that the two plots, the delta of a put and the delta of a call, actually have the same shape. And that's something we will be proving very shortly. It's tedious, but I think it's cool to show you guys the derivations. Okay, it's there. Yeah, for this slide, it's just a fashion way to re-express the Black-Scholes-Merton PDEs in terms of the Greek letters. Don't worry too much about that. I'm just rewriting the PDEs. This is what we have learned last week. This is the Black-Scholes-Merton PDEs. Now we replace this thing by gamma, we replace this thing by delta, we replace this thing by theta, and this is what you got at the end. Okay, Vega, did I jump something? Damn it. I think I skipped one slide. Where was it? Oh yeah, I skipped this one. This one I should have discussed it much earlier. Okay. Yeah, never mind. I'll first go through all these Greek letters and I'll come back to that part. Okay, so we have delta, we have theta, we have gamma. We showed you guys that they can, we can relabel the Black-Scholes-Merton PDEs using these Greek letters. We also have Vega. Yeah, I'll go through the derivations. Okay, so at the very end of the slides, this is also the last table on the textbook. You'll see something. This is actually the closed form solution to the Greek letters for European call options and also European put options. So why do we have a closed form solution? This is because we assume that the Black-Scholes-Merton formula for European calls and European puts are correct. We first assume for that, and if that was the case, then you can basically very easily write, not very easy, but yeah, not so hard. It's not so hard, but with some patience, you will be able to do the derivations yourself. Take part. T, later on we'll talk about what is Vega and Rho. Vega is actually the price change in respect to volatility, and Rho is the price change. So I really want to show something. I'll show you guys how to derive the first two things. They're the most straightforward ones, but it actually takes some patience to do the derivations. I'll first do that, and yeah, I think I have 5 more minutes. I have 6 more minutes. Let's finish everything afterwards in one shot. Okay, I think I can finish the rest of the class in about half an hour. So can we actually skip the break later on? If you guys want to go to the toilet, you can just walk out on your own. Don't worry about me. So let me just show you something. So according to the last table, it is said that delta of a call option equals to exactly N of D1. And delta of a European put option equal to exactly N of D1 minus 1. And that was also, you can also see that according to this plot, you can see that they both actually have the same shape. That's basically just N of D1. But you can see that the delta of the put option seems like dragging the delta of the co-options downward by a 1 unit size. We see it ranges from 0 and it ranges from 0 to 1. So it's like a 1-to-1 mapping by dragging it downward by a 1 level units. So why was that the case? It's actually quite not easy, but yeah, it's quite easy. But it takes some patience to make this kind of derivations. I won't derive the rest of the gamma, the rest of the Greek letters, but for this one, I think it's worth a while to show you guys. Okay, so let's first derive why the delta of a European co-option is n of d1. What is the formula for a European co-option? The formula for a European co-option is C equals to S0 n of d1 minus K multiplied by exponential to the negative RT multiplied by n of d2. So now let's take partial derivative with respect to the underlying asset's price. Partial C, partial S0. What does it look like? So the first term we have an S0 here, so we have n of d1 over here. But there's something very troubling. Basically, n of d1, what is d1? N of d1 is a function of d1, and d1 also has S0 within. So we cannot just ignore about it. So basically, we know that there's both S0 within. So first we cancel out the S0 and got n of d1 over here. For the second part, we have S0 multiplied by partial n of d1, partial S0. What about the second part? For the second part, there's K, there's R, there's T. We don't have to worry too much about it. But for D2, there's also S0 within D2. So let it be subtracted by K multiplied, K discounted, multiplied by partial n of D2 and n partial S0. Later on, we'll show you that partial C, partial S0, the delta C actually equals to n of d1. It basically means that we have to show all these brackets, very ugly brackets, equals to 0. That is the point. If we can show that this thing shrinks to 0, then we can very safely say that the delta of a co-option equals to n of d1. So that's the point. Now, first, what do we do? The first thing is there anything we can do with partial n of d1, partial S0, and partial n of d2 and partial S0? We can actually see that partial n of d1, partial S0 can be rewritten as partial n of d1, partial d1, partial S0. That's pretty obvious. The change of the quantity, change of the numerals. It's also the case for n of d2. Partial n of d2, d2, partial d2, partial S0. There's something very nice about partial d1, partial S0, partial d2, and partial S0. Let's take a look once again about d1 and d2. d2 can be rewritten as d1 minus sigma square root t. So negative square root t has nothing to do with S and partial d2, partial S are equivalent. They will be the same. If you take a look, yeah, basically S0 stands at exactly the same position in their formula. So partial S0, partial d1, sorry, partial S0, partial S0. What did I say? Partial d1, partial S0, and partial d2, partial S0 are the same. So now if we want to rewrite this thing, we can rewrite it as show S0 left with S0 multiplied by n prime d1 minus K exponential negative RT n prime d2. Okay, and we want to show now we want to show that this brackets equals to 0. That is the point. We now want to do some rearrangement. This is actually basically just a trick to solve for this problem. There's nothing intellectual about it. But let's take out the exponential of the negative RT. So we have partial D1 S0 multiplied by negative exponential negative RT. We're left with, so here this is minus K prime D2. What about the first part? We have S0 multiplied by exponential of RT. What is that thing? S0 multiplied by exponential of RT. This is actually. No, I'm not happy. Challenge my brain a lot. So what is the thing? We have seen this expression a lot. This is the price of futures. That's right. So that's denoted as F, and it will be very useful later on. So now we can rewrite the first brackets into the second bracket. The price of a future on the underline with the same strike on the same underline multiplied by n prime of d1 minus k multiplied by n prime of d2. And supposedly they should equal to 0. That is our goal. We hope that it can go to 0. So now the last part is, let's deal with this very ugly thing, n prime of d1 and n prime of d2. What is the function for CDF? The function for CDF is it's actually a cumulative function from negative infinity to d1 square root 2 pi exponential to the power of negative that formula for CDF. Very proud that I can memorize all of it. So that was n of d1. So if we want to take a partial derivative of n of d1 on d1, what are we left with? So this is to the level of d1. So skip it, and we. So that is the case when we take a partial derivative of n of d1 on d1 itself. So now what are we left with? So first, let's forget about this bracket. Just write about it. F multiplied by square root 2 pi exponential to the power of negative 1 d1 squared over 2 minus k square 2 pi exponential to the power of negative d2 squared. Okay, so now this is what the brackets remains. So lastly, let's do something about let's write it on the right hand side. Let's do 1 and d2. We know that d2 equals to d1 minus sigma square root t. So what do we have? F multiplied by, let's take out the 1 over square root 2 pi. F multiplied by exponential to the power of negative d. K multiplied by exponential to the power of negative d2 squared. d2 squared, d2 equals to d1 minus sigma squared sigma squared. Just basically we change the exponent to the d2 squared. We replace this thing. Yeah, we're almost there. The last step. So d1 sigma squared t. Does this thing recall you anything? d1 square root t. It's basically the first thing on the is the thing on the numerator, right? d1 multiplied by square a sigma squared t. So we have f multiplied by exponential a multiplied by this negative sigma squared t over 2, what we can solve with this positive sigma squared over 2t, and we are left with no. T almost there. So what do we do with an RT over here? We can throw it into the natural log. It's basically the natural log of T. If you put it together, we got so what is this thing once again? S0 multiplied by exponential of RT. Finally, things are getting nicer. This is basically, so if we are multiplying, this is exponential to the power of the log f over k. At the end, we have f over k. So we can cancel out this k. We are left with f multiplied by exponential to the power of something, and it's f multiplied by exponential to the power of something. So this thing goes to 0. This thing goes to 0. So we know that this whole bracket goes to 0. This bracket goes to 0. So regardless of what these are, we can safely say that the whole bracket over here goes to 0. Yeah, finally. Boom. So that's the derivation of why the delta of a European cooption equals to n of d1. So finally, we see that the delta of a cooption, which is partial C, partial S0, equals to n of d1. Yeah, I made it. And you can reconfirm it once again by looking at our example. You see that in the previous example, on week 0, the delta of the entire portfolio is 0.522. And that is also the case of n of d1. It's 0.522. So yeah, once again, basically you can see that the value of delta for cooption equals to n of d1. If there's some kind of dividend yield skew, then basically you have to exponential to the power of negative qt. But if there's no dividend, you don't have to worry about that. That's the toughest part. The second part for European put is much easier. We can actually reach this conclusion with put coparity. Parity is our good friend. Put coparity says that, do I have any more spaces? What does put coparity tell us? Put coparity tells us that the whole plus, I'm running out of memories. What is put coparity? The put coparity tells us that C plus K discounted equals to S0 plus P. Yeah, that was put coparity. Can anyone? I don't, yeah, I probably have to write somewhere else. All right, so you guys mind if I erase this part? I think these are something you can in your textbook stuff. So what is put coparity? Put coparity tells us that C plus discounted K equals to S. So S0 minus P equals to 0. If we take the total derivation, total derivative of everything with respect to S0, then we have partial C 0 plus 0 minus 1 minus partial P 0 equals to 0. What is the same? The same is n of d1. So basically, throw this to the right-hand side, partial P, partial S0, define it as the delta of the put equals to minus 1. Okay. So much easier, so much happier. Split coparity, you can see that we can first show that the delta of a European call is n of d1. The delta of a European put is actually n of d1 minus 1. Okay, so in the exam, don't worry too much about the derivations, but be very clear that to remember these conclusions, to remember that a delta of a European call option happened to be N of D1, the delta of a put option happened to be N of D1 minus 1. And finally, we got another intuition for N of D1. Previously in Black-Scholes, in chapter 13, chapter 15, we mentioned that N of D2 has some economic meanings. N of D1 N of D2 happens to be the probability that an European co-option may be exercised. And we don't have a good answer, we don't have a good economic intuition for N of D1. So now we can relabel N of D1 as the delta value of a European co-options. Make sense? Because we showed you guys all the bunch of derivations that N of D1 is the European call. Okay, so gamma, we talk about gamma, almost there. So let's quickly walk you guys through the last two Greek letters. Vega. Vega is something very interesting. So in the sense that there is no Greek letter called Vega. So it bothers me that I can't find a good way to type up the character for Vega because there's no Greek letter that's called Vega. So usually whenever people talk about Vega, they use the Greek letter mu, the lowercase of mu as Vega. But there's nothing that pronounced as a Vega in the world, in the universe. Don't worry about it. So what is Vega? Vega is basically the partial derivative of the textbook is very careful about it. So there's one very important point about Vega that you have to be very careful about. So previously, we have been talking about taking partial derivative of a portfolio's value in terms of some kind of parameters, right? But then when you are thinking about calculating a Vega of pre-assumptions, the pre-assumption, suppose that you have a portfolio of options. These options may be on, and that would create some kind of troublesome because you don't necessarily, it's not necessarily the case that these different options have the same volatility. So to do so, if you want to calculate a Vega for a portfolio, you have to first assume that the volatility of all underlying assets have to change in the same direction with the same amount. Suppose you will have a portfolio of several call options and several put options of a wide range of different underlying assets. You have to assume that the underlying assets, say, suppose you are calculating like partial pi, the value of your portfolio over partial sigma, that partial sigma, which of the volatility in the underlying assets has to be the same for all underlying assets. If you are constructing a portfolio with a lot of derivatives on different underlying assets. So, yeah, that's something you have to make sure you make these kind of assumptions to calculate the Vega. Otherwise, you can only estimate a Vega for one single for one single derivative, and it's not necessarily the case that they could be added across different derivatives. Okay. I hope you guys are following what I'm talking about. Okay, that's Vega. Though don't worry too much about it, though. There's nothing like Zhang Ho doesn't really talk too much about though, so you just have to understand the definition for though, and I don't think people talk too much about though. You can see, so like follow your intuition. What are the kind of assets that though may be an important factor? We're talking about the price change of derivative in terms of the interest rate. So usually it should be some fixed income assets or derivatives on fixed income assets. So that's like a different field. If you are like in the first half of the semester when we talk about futures or bonds, in that kind of things, in that kind of scenarios, it may be interesting to think about. But then for like equity options, we don't talk too much about how they change across the interest rate. So for those, you don't have to bother too much for this class, for this course per se. Okay. So this is the last important concept in the whole class. So we have been discussing about how to manage delta. Right? If you have some kind of short positions in call options, you may want to have some long positions in the underlying assets to remain a delta neutral position. The question is, can we actually try to maintain a delta neutral, gamma neutral, or vega and also vega neutral position? The answer is it's conceptually feasible. It's hypothetically doable, but practically very few people do so. It is because, think about it. So when we think about going delta neutral, we only have to long or short underlying assets. But for vega and also for gamma, you have to really deal with like these kind of higher moments. It's not feasible for you to reach a neutral condition by trading underlying assets. Buy short additional options to reach these kind of conditions. It's usually very tedious to do so, and not many people will try to reach that kind of situation. Strategy, it's already very troublesome. It's not even to say if you are trying to maintain a delta and gamma neutral strategy and rebalance your portfolio from time to time. That would be super tedious, and it would, in terms of like trading costs, it will also be very costly. However, there are situations where these kind of things could be feasible. So there's something called economy scale. So basically, if you have a large portfolio, then relatively to your portfolio size, the trading cost may seem so. If you have a relatively large portfolio, it would be more reasonable for you. So let me show you one last example in the textbook, how we may be able to do a vega neutral or also gamma neutral strategy at the same time. This is the example 19.5 in the textbook. Consider a portfolio that is delta neutral, negative 8,000. The options shown in the following table can be traded. So now it says that it first specifies the characters of our portfolios. Our portfolio is already delta neutral, but it has some kind of negative loadings of gamma. Okay. Two options for you guys to trade. And also, of course, you should be aware that the underlying asset is. So we try to manipulate the network, try to come up with a combination of these additional in the situation where we can get ourselves delta, gamma, and also vega neutral. So how do we do that? The fortunate thing is that usually, if you take like partial derivatives, these partial derivatives are usually edible. So basically, you can just reconstruct your in some options to get rid of the gammas and the vega loadings. So here it says that the portfolio can be made vega neutral by including a long position of 1,000 multiplied by 2 equals to exactly 8,000. 8,000 would cancel with our negative 8,000. That's basically what it means. However, by doing so, if you long 4,000 option ones, you also have a positive loading of delta now. Delta to 2,400. But fortunately, delta is not so hard for us to deal with because we can basically trade the underlying assets to retain a delta. So if we long 4,000 option ones, we cancel out the vegas, we got two. What do? We then require to short 2,400 units of the assets or require it to be sold to maintain delta neutrality. What it means is that if we long 4,000 option ones and also short 2,400 of the underlying assets, we can make our portfolio not only delta neutral but also vega neutral. So the gamma, what is the value of the gamma in that situation? Well, positive 2,000 net minus 5. At the end, the portfolio will have a change of gamma from negative 5,000 to negative 3,000. So we're still afraid of some large change in stock underlying price because we're still gamma. We still haven't reached a situation where gamma is neutral. So now, basically, this is the simultaneous equations, 联立方程式, something you should be very. So if we try to make our portfolio delta neutral, gamma neutral, and vega neutral at the same time, how do we do? You can basically set up a simultaneous equation. We have, and we only need to care about, so there's something I probably need to remind you guys. Did you remember that when we short 2000 as underlying assets here, underlying assets is S0, partial derivative of S0 on S0 is just 1 itself. So underlying assets has a 1 unit delta, and it has nothing else. 1, if you take an additional derivative of 0, so underlying assets has 0 gamma and try to make gamma and vega push them to be 0 first. Afterwards, we only need to play with the underlying assets to lastly delta value. So here we begin with a situation where we have a portfolio with a negative 5,000 gamma, vega, and we have the gamma and the vega of option 1 and option 2 shown over here. What do? You can set up a simultaneous equation. This one is for gamma. This one is for gamma. We have, suppose that we loan W1 weights of the first option, and we loan another W2 weights of the second option. 5,000, 0.5 W1, 0.8 W2 equals to 0. And then we have vega over here, negative 8,000, 2 multiplied by W1. So for the value of W1, W2, 2 unknowns, 2 equations, we can get 6,000. So afterwards, we will be, when we take a long position, when we take an additional long and 6,000 in option 2, what happens is that we can get into a situation where gamma and also vega are neutral. But we got some positive loadings on delta. 400 multiplied by 0.6 equals to 240. And 6,000 multiplied by 0.5 gives us 3,000. So at the end, we have an additional long, we made our delta 3,240. Value of 3,240. What do? We then short this amount of underlying assets to reach gamma's neutral and vega's neutral. Make sense? And once again, this is only visible if you have a very large portfolio. And this is only at that specific moment, because once you set up the hedge, once every conditions, any of the condition changes, your value, the value of your vega, the value of your gamma, the value of your delta would also simultaneously change. But at that specific instant, the change will be canceled out with all kinds of your portfolio constructions. But afterwards, you reach to full neutral conditions. Okay, does that make sense? Do you guys have any questions? Okay, so yeah, that's pretty much about it. And we have Greek letters. Let's try to very easy, very straightforward practice question together, and then we can call it for a day, okay? So I picked the first 2 questions, 19.1 and also 19.2. For 19.1, this is like the most straightforward possible kind of question I could ask you. How can a short position in 1,000 options be made delta neutral when the delta of each option is 0.7? We have, this was like the previous questions. We short 1,000 shares of the options, and each option has a delta of 0.7. 1,000 multiplied by 0.7 equals to 700. We're taking a short position, so we have shares to remain a delta neutral condition. Okay, I hope this is not too fast for you guys. For practice question 19.2, calculate the delta of an at the money 6 months European call option on a non-dividend paying stocks when the risk-free interest rate is 10% per annum and the stock price is 25% per annum. So this is one of the tell us about like the value of the delta. So can we actually do the calculation ourselves? The answer is yes. If you apply the Black-Scholes-Merton formula, you know the delta of an European call option happen to be N of D. Question is asking you what is the N of D1 according to all the inputs. That's basically what this question is asking about. Well, of course, I could also ask you about what is the delta of an European put options. That's also a type of question I could ask. So here, do we have enough information? We have an European option that is at the money. We have interest rate, we have volatility, we have time to maturity. So there's one problem. You guys may ask me, hey, you didn't give us the information line price and what is the strike price? But here it is mentioned that it is an at the money option. Basically, what it means is that K is roughly the same as S0. So what is the formula for D1 once again? The formula for D1 looks like this. So if we have the same value for S0 and K, then this fraction goes to 1. Natural log of 1 is 0. So let's just ignore about it. So basically, it's asking about how do we do the calculation for D1 with these provided inputs. R equals to 10%, sigma equals to 25%, T equals to 0.5 because there's half a year still before maturity. So if you do your calculation, you know that it equals to 3712. And if you do your calculation or during the exam, I will provide you a table of the CDF of standard normal distributions. So you may check the table that I provided. So you can look at the table to see N of 0.737. What is the value of it? It's roughly 0.64. So 0.64 is N of D1, and it happened to be the delta of this specific European call option. Of course, I could also combine like the first question and the second question together. I could ask you about, we have two kind of European call options. How do we do a delta hedge? Then first you have to calculate the delta value, and it basically means that the dollar increase in underlying assets coming to a $1 increase in underlying assets, the European call option will have an increase in value of like 64 cents. So to hedge away, if you short this European call, you have to long underlying with roughly this proportion. Now, this idea about delta hedging, and that's the most important section in this whole chapter. Okay, you guys have any question? Yes. European, you mean the table? Okay, she's asking me about the table. Oh yeah, I probably should provide it in advance so that you guys can have some time to do the practice. I'll provide you guys with the same table I had distribution. No, that's the distribution. I'm sure I have the table somewhere. Material. Yeah, I'll find it and I'll post it on NTU Core in advance so that you guys can do the practice yourself to see if you can look up. You know how to look up the table. Okay. So yeah, I promise about that, and I'll post it maybe just later when I find the file. So that's for chapter 19. Chapter 20 is also posted. It's quite thin, and we'll be able to, I think, finish it like in an hour or an hour and a half. So that's chapter 20. Chapter 20 is very interesting. It's about volatility smile. It's super interesting. There's a lot of cool discussion about what is right, the model or the world. So we'll discuss about chapter 20, and I think we'll have enough time for you guys to shoot me any questions next week. Once again, the assignments are all posted. So the last assignment is about chapter 19 and chapter 20. It will be due on December 19th, which is the day for final exam. Don't worry too much about it. It will be of the same format. There will be true or false, multiple choice, and a few like filling the blank questions. You can try to do your practice. If you are like super proficient in all the in all the assignments questions, and also in the slides, the question that I go through on the slides, you should be fine for the final exam. Okay, so that's pretty much about it. Let's call it for a day.